After every staff meeting here at Good Sam, we get an email with the staff notes from the staff meeting we just had, so that we can keep track of everything. And one day I was reading those over, and I saw that somebody had added this annotation to one of the dates. It said, "Episcopal high carb season begins." In my early morning brain fog, I thought, what is that about? I am sure that the word carbohydrate is found neither in biblical Hebrew nor in biblical Greek. And then I began to look at the gospel lessons, with the ones for the weeks coming up, and I thought, oh yeah, I get it. After Proper 11 back on July the 21st, the gospel readings just became bread, bread, bread. Have you noticed that? Jesus, will be talking about bread through September the 1st this year. That's Propers 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. That's a lot of bread. The writer of John's gospel really wants us to hear some sort of message, or rather, Jesus wants us to hear, and it involves somehow bread. Now, I really like bread. Probably would eat more of it than I should. Probably do eat more of it than I should. But I especially like homemade yeast breads just warm right out of the oven. And when my son was young, I made loaves of homemade whole wheat with honey and yeast week in and week out. I was a stay-at-home mom that way. But how can bread be that important to us? Is it important enough for us to hear the same message, or at least the same metaphor, 5 weeks in a row? John thought it was a good message, and evidently the choosers of our liturgical readings think it's pretty important. Well, if you look at it, bread really is a pretty basic and important food. When no other food is available, bread can keep us from starvation. At least give us enough energy to do what we have to do to survive. And when we have, in good times, when we have vegetables and fruits and meats and dairy products to add to that, then a hearty slice of bread is a great platform on which to build a sandwich. Or it can even become a wrap to hold a lot of loose ingredients together. And bread's very portable. It's easy to take with us in a sack or a briefcase to work. And it toasts well if you like something hot, especially in the morning. My grandfather, though, used to eat cold bread, cornbread, soaked, of course he called it soaked bread. It was cornbread crumbled up in cold buttermilk. And he knew that the next morning he'd have hot biscuits to go with his sorghum syrup and eggs and coffee and bacon. Bread's important. It helps us make sense of our hungers no matter where we are, even traveling down a road we don't know. So what could it mean for Jesus to say to us, whoever eats this bread will live forever? And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. And how could Jesus go on to say, those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them? Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever eats me will live because of me. This is the bread which came down from heaven. Jesus is not talking here about the rules for a church service, about literal bread and wine, not talking about wafers and whatever kind of wine we have in our cup. He's talking about his sharing our humanity and his divinity. His relationship with the Father, in that he shares both. And his relationship and his presence with us is part of that, us in our humanity. That's what it means for us to eat his flesh and drink his blood, is to share his life among ourselves, to have his life with God as human beings who are hungry for a greater life. We need to taste him and see. how God's life and humanity's life combined are in relationship. And that's what this reading is about. It's about relationship and presence. Father, Son, and us. Relationship and presence among us. In Jesus, the life of God has entered our human life, as if we have just digested and swallowed it. God has entered our flesh and blood, because we are human as Jesus is, and has endured life as we endure it, has lived a real life in ways that we live a real life, held in by the limits of time and space, as our bodies are, sweating and hungering as our bodies do. We have needed sleep, food, drink, companionship, and Jesus, like us, has needed those same things and has matured physically and in understanding the way we do. In Jesus, God's power and love have entered our world, not as a visitor on a business trip, but as one who has immigrated here from another hemisphere, replanted God's own life here, life without limitation to a life, moving from a life without limitation to a life bounded on every side as we are. This visiting one, the Son, stands where those two worlds overlap, divine and human. He has access to the Father the same way that we have access and companionship with the Son. And the limitations that God endures in the presence of Christ are for our sake, so that we might not be left here alone as victims of our own sin and our own misdirection, our own ignorance of what life is really about. John's message for us today is not about wafers and wine. It's about relationship and presence to each other. That is the bread that has come down from heaven, a taste of what it might mean for us to live more fully as God does as we see it in Jesus. It's about the relationship and presence with each other as with God. In Jesus' fleshly life, in which he is as earthbound as we are, and yet still present to the Father, when we look at him, we can come to see glimpses of what God's way of life is like. And we can see that we are being invited into that way of life. We are invited to swallow it, if you will, to take it as nourishment and not resist it. In Jesus' presence, we earth creatures can drink deeply and fulsomely of the divine love that Jesus has brought to our table. Tasting Jesus' life, we learn how to pass on his divine love to all around. It's a faith decision. With whom will we relate and how? If being fed with Jesus' life is essential to us, if it's an issue of relationship and presence, making ourselves available to God and others means a lot. It's important because God makes God's own way of life available to us so that we may share it with the world as Jesus did. It's not too different from that moment when a young adult comes home with a potential spouse and introduces him or her to their parents. He said, "Let me introduce you to him or her, my chosen one. He or she is delicious. She feeds me, she makes me happy, she gives me energy for my life." Our faith, our choice, is to trust about what we know about Jesus and about ourselves in relationship and presence that is being offered to us in both directions. This is the breath that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Relationship and presence with God and all people. Relationship and presence as they are found and shared with us in Jesus. The great St. Augustine advised those whom he was preparing to receive their first Eucharist after their baptism, "Be what you see, receive who you are. Be what you see, receive who you are." In other words, you are to become the body and blood of Jesus by taking him in, letting him be digested in your mind and heart and body until it becomes who you are, a way of life that bestows heavenly food in this place of need where we live. Heavenly drink right here amidst the world's thirst. As Augustine said, from many grains, all of us, may there be one bread. From many grapes, may there be one wine. Us, as the loving presence of Christ, bearing Christ's love and grace to whomever we meet, because we have eaten enough of that love and grace, absorbed it into our lives, that we have it to give. May we become that bread which we see. May we receive who we are, beloved and loving, and giving ourselves away.